Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When I met my ex at a mutual friend's party, we hit it off immediately, and for the first few months, everything seemed perfect. They were charming, attentive, and always knew just what to say. But slowly things started to change. At first, it was small things. They'd make snide comments about my friends or criticize my choices. I brushed it off, thinking they were just having bad days. But then it escalated. They started controlling who I could see, what I could wear, and even tried to dictate my career choices. When I tried to stand up for myself, they'd manipulate me into thinking I was the problem. The emotional abuse turned physical one night after a heated argument. That was my wake-up call. I realized I needed to get out and fast. With the help of a close friend, I managed to leave while my ex was at work. I packed what I could and moved to a different state, determined to start fresh. For a while, things were looking up. I found a new job, made new friends, and started feeling like myself again. But then, out of the blue, I received an email that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "A message of healing and forgiveness." I opened it, my hands shaking. The sender introduced themselves as my ex-partner's therapist and said they wanted to share some quotes on forgiveness that might help in my healing process. I stared at the screen wondering how this person got my email. As I kept reading, my shock turned to anger. The sender went on to tell me that my ex was struggling to move on. They said my ex had expressed deep remorse and a desire to make amends, claiming they would spend the rest of their life making it up to me if given the chance. This was a complete violation of my privacy and boundaries. I had specifically told my ex to stop contacting me, and now their therapist was reaching out. It felt like a whole new level of manipulation. I immediately called my best friend, needing someone to talk to about this bizarre situation. I told them about the email I'd received from my ex's therapist. My friend was shocked, agreeing that it was incredibly unprofessional. I explained how the therapist had sent me quotes about forgiveness and told me my ex couldn't move on, making me feel like they were trying to guilt me into reconnecting. My friend suggested that I consider reporting the therapist, which hadn't occurred to me. When I asked if that was even possible, my friend assured me it was, explaining that this was a major ethical violation and I should file a complaint with the state licensing board. I agreed that they were right and said I'd look into it right away. After hanging up, I did some research and found the appropriate licensing board for therapists in my ex's state. I drafted a formal complaint, detailing the email and explaining how it violated my privacy and boundaries. As I was about to send it, a thought struck me. What if this wasn't a real therapist at all? Could my ex have set this up to manipulate me further? I decided to do some digging. I searched for the therapist's name online but couldn't find any professional listings or credentials. This raised even more red flags. I updated my complaint to include my suspicions about the therapist's authenticity. I also decided to reach out to local law enforcement in my ex's area to report this potential impersonation. When I spoke to an officer, they thanked me for bringing this to their attention, explaining that impersonating a medical professional was a serious offense and they would look into the matter. I expressed my appreciation and shared my worry about what lengths my ex might go to in order to contact me. The officer validated my concerns and recommended that I keep all documentation of these interactions, as it could be useful if they needed to pursue legal action. After filing the complaint and speaking with the police, I felt angry that my ex was still trying to manipulate me. A few weeks later, I received a call from the licensing board. The representative informed me that they had investigated my complaint and discovered that the person claiming to be a therapist was not licensed in their state. They told me they had forwarded this information to law enforcement. When I asked what would happen next, they explained that the police would handle it from there and might contact me for additional information. True to their word, the police reached out shortly after. They informed me that they had questioned my ex, who admitted to creating the fake therapist persona. The detective told me that my ex was facing charges for impersonation and harassment and that they were also pursuing a restraining order on my behalf. I expressed that it was finally over and thanked them for taking it seriously. The detective reassured me that I had done the right thing by reporting it and that my actions might help protect others from similar situations. My ex's attempt to manipulate me had backfired spectacularly. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. I had stood up for myself, taken action, and come out stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I could face them head on. It all began when I woke up late for work. My alarm didn't go off, and I had to rush through my morning routine. I skipped breakfast, spilled coffee on my shirt, and barely made it to the office on time. My boss wasn't happy, and I spent the day playing catch-up on all my tasks. By the time I left work, I was exhausted and starving. I decided to stop by the local grocery store to pick up some essentials and maybe grab a quick snack. Little did I know, this simple errand would turn into a nightmare. As I walked into the store, I noticed it was unusually crowded for a weekday evening. I grabbed a basket and started making my way through the aisles, trying to navigate around the other shoppers. I was in the cereal aisle when I heard a commotion behind me. I turned around to see a middle-aged woman glaring at me. She was tapping her foot impatiently, her arms crossed over her chest. She rudely told me I was blocking the way. I apologized and said I'd move my cart. I tried to step aside, but the woman kept advancing towards me, her eyes narrowed. She lectured me about being more aware of my surroundings, saying some people had important things to do and couldn't waste time waiting for inconsiderate people like me. I was taken aback by her hostility. I hadn't even been standing there for more than a few seconds. I repeated my apology and told her there was no need to be rude. The woman got even angrier, accusing me of being the rude one for blocking the aisle and wasting her time. She kept moving forward, forcing me to back up until I found myself cornered at the end of the aisle. I started to feel uncomfortable. I tried to calm the situation, saying I'd apologized and asking if we could please just move on. The woman mockingly asked if I'd like that, sarcastically suggesting I wanted to brush off my rudeness and go about my day. I was about to respond when suddenly I saw a glint of metal. To my horror, the woman had pulled out a small knife from her purse. She threatened to teach me a lesson about respect, calling me a little brat. My blood ran cold. I looked around frantically, hoping someone would notice and intervene. That's when I saw a familiar face approaching from behind the woman. It was my sister, who I knew was a United States Marshal. My sister had always been the tough one in our family. She joined law enforcement right out of high school and worked her way up to become a marshal. We had plans to meet for dinner later, but I guess she decided to stop by the store first. Talk about perfect timing. As the woman waved the knife threateningly, my sister quietly moved into position behind her. She announced herself as a federal agent and ordered the woman to drop the weapon. The woman froze, her eyes widening in shock. She slowly turned her head to see my sister standing there, gun drawn and badge visible. My sister repeated her order to drop the weapon. The knife clattered to the floor as the woman raised her hands. But that wasn't the end of her humiliation. As the reality of the situation sank in, a dark stain began to spread across the front of her pants. She had literally peed herself in fear. I exclaimed at the sight. The woman stammered, trying to claim it wasn't what it looked like. My sister ignored her excuses and informed her she was under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon. As my sister handcuffed the woman, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered. Some were recording the incident on their phones, while others just stared in disbelief. The store manager approached, asking what was going on. My sister explained the situation, identifying herself as a United States Marshal and requesting that the local police be called to take the woman into custody. The store manager nodded, still looking shocked, and hurried off to make the call. I thanked my sister, hardly believing what had just happened. She asked if I was okay, and I admitted I was a bit shaken up but otherwise fine. As we waited for the police to arrive, the woman kept mumbling excuses and threats under her breath. But with her hands cuffed behind her back and a wet stain on her pants, she didn't look very threatening anymore. When the police finally showed up, they took statements from me, my sister, and several witnesses. The woman was led away, still trying to argue her innocence despite the numerous people who had seen her pull the knife. As things calmed down, my sister turned to me with a grin. She jokingly asked if I was still up for dinner, saying we had quite a story to discuss over our meal. I agreed but suggested we order in, feeling I'd had enough excitement for one day. I've always been a bit of an introvert, preferring the comfort of my own home to social gatherings. But when my wife and I moved to this quiet suburban neighborhood last year, she insisted we make an effort to get to know our neighbors. So when we received an invitation to a community potluck, I reluctantly agreed to go. The event was organized by our next-door neighbor, a woman I'd only seen in passing. She seemed friendly enough, always waving from her perfectly manicured lawn. Little did I know what was about to unfold. The day of the potluck arrived and we headed over with our homemade lasagna. As we approached the host's house, I could smell something delicious wafting from the kitchen. It was far fancier than anything I'd expect at a neighborhood gathering. As we entered, the host greeted us warmly, welcoming everyone and expressing hope that we were all hungry. Her enthusiasm was palpable as she ushered us inside. The spread was impressive, to say the least. Among the various homemade dishes, there was one that stood out, a beautifully plated gourmet meal that looked like it belonged in a five-star restaurant. Impressed by the dish, I complimented the host and asked if she had made it herself. She responded with a giggle, explaining that she had wanted to ensure everyone had something truly special, so she had hired a private chef to prepare it. She emphasized that only the best would do for her neighbors. I was taken aback but didn't think much of it at the time. The evening progressed pleasantly enough, with people mingling and enjoying the food. As the night was winding down, our host clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. The host began by expressing hope that we had all enjoyed the wonderful meal she had provided. Then, to everyone's surprise, she brought up the matter of payment. The room fell silent. Payment? For a potluck? She went on to explain that she had gone above and beyond by hiring a professional chef. She then said that she thought it was only fair for each household to contribute $1,000 to cover the costs. The reaction was immediate. One neighbor reminded her that this was supposed to be a potluck and that everyone had brought dishes. Another chimed in, saying they couldn't afford that kind of money for one meal. The host defended her position, arguing that since we had all enjoyed the food, it wasn't fair for her to bear the entire cost alone. I spoke up, apologizing but saying that we hadn't agreed to this arrangement. I added that if we had known, we wouldn't have come. The host's face turned red with anger. She then threatened to take legal action against all of us. True to her word, within a week, we all received notices that she was suing us in small claims court for theft of services. It was absurd, but we couldn't ignore it. The day of the hearing arrived and we all showed up unsure of what to expect. The judge looked bewildered as he reviewed the case. He asked the host to clarify if she had indeed organized a potluck, hired a chef without informing her guests, and was now suing them for not paying. The host confirmed this, insisting that since we had eaten the food, we should pay for it. The judge explained that this wasn't how potlucks worked and asked if she had informed her guests beforehand that they would be expected to pay. When the host admitted she hadn't, the judge declared that she had no case. He explained that we had been invited to a community event, not a catered dinner, and dismissed the case. But it didn't end there. As we left the courthouse, she was served with papers. Turns out the neighbors had banded together to countersue her for legal fees and emotional distress. In the end, she was ordered to pay each household $500 for the trouble she'd caused. She moved out of the neighborhood shortly after, unable to face the embarrassment. I always dreamed of having a big, happy family. When I met my spouse, everything seemed to fall into place. We got married, bought a cute little house, and soon found out we were expecting our first child. It was like a fairy tale come true. But there was one problem. My mother-in-law. She'd always been a bit overbearing, but I tried to brush it off. I wanted to have a good relationship with her, for my spouse's sake. Little did I know, she was about to turn our lives upside down. When we announced the pregnancy, my mother-in-law immediately began pestering us about names. She insisted that we name the baby after her, claiming it was a family tradition. We politely declined, explaining that we appreciated her suggestion but wanted to choose our own name. My spouse backed me up, telling his mom that we wanted something unique for our child. She didn't take it well. For months, she'd call or show up unannounced, always with a new argument for why we should use her name. It was exhausting, but we stood our ground. When our beautiful baby was born, we named them exactly what we wanted. My mother-in-law seemed to accept it, albeit grudgingly. We thought the drama was over. About a month after the birth, we got a strange call from a distant relative. They congratulated us on the baby's renaming ceremony, mentioning how lovely the photos looked. Confused, I asked what they were talking about. They explained that my mother-in-law had posted about it on social media and seemed surprised we hadn't attended. My heart sank. I hung up and immediately called my spouse. I told them about the crazy thing their mother had done, how she was telling people we had renamed the baby. My spouse was saying it was impossible and that she couldn't just do that. But she had. We soon discovered she'd not only thrown a renaming ceremony without our knowledge, but she'd also filed for a legal name change behind our backs. She'd forged our signatures and everything. When we confronted her, she acted like we were the unreasonable ones. She claimed she did what was best for the family and that we'd thank her later. I argued back, saying it was our child and she had no right. She countered that she had every right as a grandmother. The argument went on for hours. We left feeling defeated and angry, but we weren't about to give up. The next day, we hired a lawyer and filed to have the name change reversed. It was a long, stressful process, but we were determined to fight for our child's identity. In the meantime, my mother-in-law's antics continued. She showed up at our house one day with a giant, gaudy sign bearing her chosen name for our baby. She tried to hang it in the nursery herself, gushing about how beautiful it was and how the baby would love it. My spouse told her to stop, saying she was going too far. I asked her to leave, reminding her that we'd repeatedly asked her to respect our decision. She left in a huff, but the sign mysteriously appeared on our porch every few days after that. We donated it to charity each time. As the legal battle dragged on, we realized we needed to do something drastic. We came up with a plan. We invited my mother-in-law over, pretending we'd had a change of heart. I told her we'd been thinking about what she said and that maybe she was right about the name. She was overjoyed, saying she knew we'd come around. My spouse then added a condition. We'd use her name, but only if she withdrew the legal name change request herself. We explained that we wanted this to be our decision, not the court's. She agreed eagerly, not realizing we had no intention of actually changing the name. As soon as she withdrew the legal request, we cut off all contact. We changed our phone numbers, moved to a new house, and made sure she couldn't find us. It was a difficult decision, but we knew it was necessary for our family's peace and our child's well-being. Sometimes, you have to take drastic measures to protect what's important. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.